to the final day of the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference. We hope you've been enjoying things so far. We have had an amazing time. We are so grateful to all of our participating authors and to you for viewing our wonderful conference. So a few things I wanted to go over quickly. This conference is sponsored by Crime Writers Canada and Sisters in Crime, the Toronto chapter. And we are so grateful that we have their support in bringing these authors to us to put on these amazing sessions for you this week. Now, Writers First is the founding and host of this conference. And we are fortunate today that on our Maple Leaf Murder East panel, we have one of the founders of Writer First and of the Maple Leaf Mystery Conference with us today, and that's Michael Kent. So you'll get to hear from him shortly. Our other founder of Maple Leaf Mystery Conference and Writers First is Mike Martin, and you had the privilege of seeing him in our book launch that we did on Thursday. Now, all of these sessions are being recorded, and in a few days, we'll be able to have those links for you, and anything that you were unable to see, you'll be able to catch up on. So we also have our online bookstore, and many of our participating authors have books available there. And one of the amazing features of our online bookstore is that these books are sent from the authors themselves, and they will be signed and sent to you. So it's a really great feature of our conference. So be sure to check that out. We will put that post in our chat function. And later today, we have a special author spotlight with Vicki Delaney. So be sure to stay tuned. We've got a full day of wonderful panels for you. But without further ado, I will pass it over to our wonderful team on Maple Leaf Murder East.
Welcome to the Maple Leaf Murder East panel. My name is Denis Coupal, author of the thriller Blind Shot. I'm pleased to be your host as we talk for the next hour with four tremendous authors: Michael Kent, Catherine Astolfo, J.A. Menzies, and Lisa DeNicolitis. And please, Lisa, correct me if I don't say it correctly as we go. What we'll do in this hour, what I propose is that we'll take 2 or 3 minutes with each of the authors, and I'll just present a very short bio of each of you. And then I'll ask a few basic questions, mainly about the setting in your novels. And I just thought that'd be an interesting subject. And, you know, what drives an author to choose a certain place over another? Is it a place where they grew up? Was it a place they've never been to but are interested in researching? And other related questions, very briefly. And then for the greater part of the session, whatever time's left, we'll open discussion between our four panelists, focusing on the difference in writing a series versus a single novel and all the parameters that are in there, and related questions. And we'll answer any audience questions at that time. So please just post your questions and we'll get to them. So let's begin. Michael Kent is the prolific author of the Lieutenant Robert Beaudry hard-boiled crime novels, beginning with Blood Tale in 2017, and now working on his 8th novel in the series Dead End Drive, coming out in May of this year. So Michael, where were you born and where do you now live and work?
I was born in Montreal, and I work in Montreal, live and work in Montreal.
Well, excellent. Where are your novels mainly set, and why?
Well, one of my favorite authors, mystery authors, Robert B. Parker, has his Spencer series in Boston. John D. McDonnell has his protagonist, Travis McGee, on a houseboat at Slip 18 in Bahia Mar, Florida. It doesn't really matter where you set it. You just have to know the locale very well. So ergo, that's why I'm set in Montreal. So as an international consultant, I worked in many countries, but the home has always been Montreal.
Excellent. And are you consistent in your settings from book to book?
It's always based in Montreal because it's a different city. We're in the midst of all kinds of repairs to our infrastructure. So Beaudry once said that from the International Space Station, you can see the Great Wall of China and the orange construction cones of Montreal. So I always interject something. So I'll wander off island to Quebec City or Eastern Ontario. But it's always a locale that I've actually been to. So write what you know. So it has to be somewhere that I know.
So how would you deal with my next question, which is there a location you'd want to explore in a future novel, but you don't know it?
Well, like I said, as an international consultant, I've been in a lot of places. So I am planning at least one novel with Lieutenant Beaudry's Paramour, Pat, when she was a Garda policewoman in Dublin. So, but I'll certainly write that one as a joint collaboration with the woman author to get a better perspective. So write what you know, right?
Very good, very good. Thank you for that. So we'll move on for now. We'll get back to you, Michael. We'll get back to and now Catherine Astolfo is an award-winning writer of short stories and author of 6 novels and 2 novellas. Her latest novel is The Grand Art of Murder, set in a fictional town near Brantford, Ontario. So welcome, Catherine. Nice to see you. And where were you born and where do you now live and work?
I was born in Brampton, Ontario, and I now live in Brantford, Ontario, another bra city. I always make sure it's a bra city. And I live and work in Brantford now, the home of the birthplace of Wayne Gretzky.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Where are your novels mainly set and why?
My novels are always set by water. Water was such a big influence in my childhood. We were always at the beach or at the lake. We had a beautiful river running through Brampton. We have a gorgeous river running through Brantford. And I just love water. And I've always wanted to live on water, except there's flooding and giant spiders and things like that. So I always create a kind of, ideal place on the water where none of those things exist, but you get the beautiful view and the sound of the water in your backyard.
Everything but no bugs. Okay.
Right.
So if I ask you, are you consistent in your settings from book to book? You have an interesting answer to that.
Yeah, I'm not really consistent, except for the water piece, but I've always, although they're all small towns too, small fictional towns, they can be set beside a larger city, but the town itself that my protagonist lives in generally tends to be small and peaceful. And I think it's because all the chaos that goes around them, this is their sanctuary. This is where they come home when they get involved in all these terrible things. And so yeah, in that way it's consistent, but I have moved around quite a bit.
Okay, so what would be a location you haven't written about yet, but would like to explore in a future novel?
My next novel is definitely going to be about the Grand River again, placed in Brantford this time instead of the fictional town next to it. But so at the Glenhurst Gallery, which is a beautiful old place in Brantford that hosts various artists, and they've had a ghost hunter in there, a ghost hunter group, and so I'm going to sort of base it on that. But I would like to kind of branch out to California sometime because my son's family lives there, and I've seen such beautiful countryside there. I would just have to spend a lot more time. Darn.
Right, to get to know it and do like Michael says, write about what you know.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Catherine. We'll move on to J.A. Menzies. J.A. Menzies is the author of the Manziuk and Ryan Mysteries, classic style whodunits set in modern day Toronto. Reviewers, including Publishers Weekly, have compared her novels to the best of Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers. So hi, J.A. How are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for being here. So let me start with a few, the same questions are going around to each author. So where were you born and where do you now live and work?
Well, technically I was born in Regina, but I was born to a not quite 16-year-old whose family came from north of Saskatoon. And so my adoptive parents lived in Wolseley, Saskatchewan. So, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in there. Excellent. And where do you now live and work? Is that?
For the last 36 years, we have lived in Markham, Ontario, even though my husband and I were both raised in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and lived there and so forth. This is where we've ended up, and this is where our sons all live, so we're here.
Excellent. So where are your novels mainly set and why?
So I have loved mysteries from when I was teeny tiny. I started out with Agatha Christie, of course, and Perry Mason, thanks to my mother's mother, my grandmother. And I've just read every mystery I could, but the ones I always go back to are the traditional type of whodunits. And Georgette Hare is one of my very favorite mystery writers, not just historical romance. So what I wanted to do was to do a detective, police procedural, because I know nothing about being a detective. And I can't imagine being me and trying to solve a crime. So I had to use the resources of the police. And from where I live, Toronto was the obvious location.
Okay. Right. And so are your settings consistent from book to book?
So the reason I write is not just to have a crime solved. I do a lot different. It's more like a Niall Marsh and, as I said, Georgette Hare kind of thing, where I introduce all the characters before there's a crime. And then I have the police come in and then we have to solve it. So for me, I like the closed settings, not exactly a room, but a location. So my first book is set on a gated estate at a July house party. So you know that one of the characters had to do it. My second book is set in my Diamond Zone, not Sky Dome, Diamond Zone, and it involves professional baseball players, the media, and so forth. And my third, Shadow of a Butterfly, is set in the penthouse of an elite retirement home for people who have been creative, so authors and dancers and whatnot. So they're in Toronto, but they're mythical locations, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure does. And what location would you want to explore in a future novel that you haven't yet?
Years ago, I started seeing places for bodies. I wasn't looking for them at the time. I wasn't writing. I still had little kids, but literally,
I'm getting a lot of smiles on this one.
I'm in a Japanese garden in Vancouver, pushing a stroller. I come around a corner and I see a bush and I think that would be a great place to see 2 feet sticking out. And that's where my first book came from. I had to figure out whose feet they were, where the bush was. It turns out it's on a gated estate in Toronto. And so I ended up with a list of about a dozen locations. So all my books start from the setting, from where the murder is found. And unfortunately, I got breast cancer a few years ago. So the book I was working on at the time is set in a retail store for women's wear in Toronto. And my settings usually end up having something I know about it. And my dad owned a clothing store. So I feel I could do that. So when I get back to it, that's the one I'm going to be working on.
Well, that's really interesting. And well, thanks for that. I'm going to move on to our next and fourth author, Lisa de Nicolitz. Welcome, Lisa. And Lisa de Nicolitz is the international award-winning author of 10 novels, beginning in 2010 with The Hungry Mirror, and most recently with The Rage Room, finalist in the 2021 International Book Awards. So hi, Lisa. Again, sorry?
No, just saying hi from this end.
Oh, hi. Now, here's the first question. Where were you born and where do you now live and work?
I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. And actually, for most of my life, we lived out in the countryside. So I was really not a big city person at all. And then ended up in Toronto. And I've been in Toronto for 22 years, haven't managed to lose the accent, but I have managed to use Toronto as a setting in 7 of my 10 books in one way or another. Although sometimes it's a little unusual. I've got my bookmarks here to remind me. And so, like in No Fury Like That, which is largely set in purgatory, when my protagonist comes back down to earth, she goes and hangs out in a place around Prince Edward County. So it really can vary, but so the 7 of the 10 books have very different places. Between the cracks she fell, I used an abandoned school in Bowmanville, so it's very much what catches my fancy. But it is amazing. Even in the Rage Room, which is a futuristic novel, it's set in Toronto, but Toronto is no longer Toronto. All the places have saints' names, but actually the main action takes place in the Sherbourne subway station, because that's where the time continuum is the most fragile, and people can time travel from Sherbourne. So my books are a little bit unusual in the way that I use Toronto.
Well, that's fascinating. So, if I could say, are you consistent? I'm going to answer my own question. You're not consistent in your settings. So how do you go about making up a setting? It's just your imagination. You just let yourself go and see what comes.
Yes, also it really speaks to me. Like when we found the abandoned school in Bowmanville, I just knew that I had to set a novel there. And so it actually became the sort of the jumping off point for writing that book. I was like, what if someone was to live here? How would that work? How would she have ended up here? What terrible things would happen to her before she got here to get her here? And then what even worse things would happen to her while she is there? So pretty much the setting oftentimes creates the idea for the story for me. So yeah, but I think I have an extremely vivid imagination, probably over vivid, and it can take me to places, but it's very handy.
Sounds like it. That's fascinating. And so I'm really intrigued at how you'll answer my last question on that subject, which is what location would you want to explore in a future novel?
Well, I'm actually in my novel that's coming out in fall of this year. It explores a futuristic Toronto, and so I think that's going to be quite interesting. And the novel is kind of like Mad Max Fury Road meets True Romance, and then I've reworked Toronto to fit into that. So I'm hoping people will find that interesting.
Well, that is interesting, and what a mix. I want to see the movie. Well, okay, thank you. And now, thank you to all 4 authors for the moment. Well, what I'll do is I'll turn it over into a 4-author discussion and an open discussion, and we can take the stepping point of this discussion from the location discussions, which was really interesting and more varied in types of answers than I even expected. When I thought of asking about settings, which is an important concern of mine, like in what I write. So in terms of open discussion, what if I start us off, and please, everyone's welcome to pitch in here on this for the next, we've got 40 minutes, so we can go into a lot of different questions, audience questions as well. What if we look at the idea of the trend that's going on where, and it's not a new trend, it's an older trend, but it's the idea of books in series or single novels, and everything that goes in there. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts about that this being, is it a trend or is it not a trend? Is it something that is causing ease in terms of you as a writer to move forward into familiar territory each time you write something, or is it something that's forcing you to prove yourself, each time and be original because you're visiting a place that you've been before, or characters that you've visited before? What do you think? If I throw that out there like that. Anyone? Michael?
Well, I think the difference, in my humble opinion, of writing a single novel is it can be very plot driven, something like that. Like even your stories, you lead us off the beaten track, and then we're surprised at the ending. So, but in a series, and I think you have to flesh out the people more. Like the way I do it is I've written like a CV, a whole history for the people, so I know the way they're
Oh,
thinking.
really?
And I know what their thoughts are, how they think, their personality traits that come back every novel. So I've written a series mainly because of if I look at my library here, it's mostly Robert B. Parker and Spencer and things like that, series that I grew up with, Mickey Spillane, whatever. So my detective is a homicide detective. So of course I have to have a body first, or else he doesn't have a job. So that series, and he evolved. They're mostly sort of semi-standalone novels, except there's an evolution of the police person in it, the protagonist and his girlfriend and his friends throughout the novel. So that's interesting to do. I'm also working on other projects. So I'm working with a project with somebody else on completely different, on near-death experiences. I'm working on a spy novel, loosely based on fact. So I'm still continuing this series. In my mind, I've got about 10 or 12 of them to do. So, but
They're all connected. They're all
yeah,
connected.
you have to flesh out the people more. Like I think Janet Ivanovich should be required reading for any author. She's very successful. Her characters are bigger than life. She's got a grandma who carries a Colt 45 in her purse. Stephanie Plum's bad luck with cars, are always blowing up or something. Her uncertain love life. Some of Janet's plots may get away with being as thin as dishwater, but her bigger than life characters drive you through the novel with gusto. The last Stephanie Plum novel I read was number 26, and she's also got some between the numbers. So she's still going strong. And it gets to a point when they're in a series that the fans have to like, the characters. The characters have to be vivid, and you get to be virtual friends of sorts. So I think that's the main difference between a standalone and a series. Humble opinion.
Sure. Any other thoughts?
I think it has. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
I think that, sometimes I think series and standalones have always existed side by side. And I've done both. And I think you need to know when a series has run its course. I think sometimes publishers expect the writer to go on and on and on with a series character or characters, and that can be very, very difficult. I found that after 4 books, I was done with those characters and I wanted to move on and branch out to different characters because I wanted to explore some other personality. And so I think they'll both exist, though. I think there's a place for series and there's a place for standalones as well. Sorry, Nancy, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say I had something weird in my other life. My very first book that was published was a YA novel that I felt was complete. And I wanted to write 4 books with 4 different boys, teenage boys as the main character. I've always written from a male perspective. I don't know why. Anyway, they accepted my book, but they wanted 2 more of the same character, which was like, what might happen next. And it was kind of fascinating because I hadn't seen anything before, but after they asked for it, I immediately, I can do that. So it ended up as a 4-book series. But I think some of it is how much you enjoy world building, because if you're having to start building a new world every time, if you love that, that's great. If you don't love that.
Right. And are there cliches in books that are in genre writing that we're mainly talking about here today? Are there cliches that are pitfalls that you can stumble into? Is that something to fight with? Anyone?
Yeah, I would say that's a constant battle, not to be cliche-ish and to have some kind of character that is almost a cartoon character or I think, as Michael said, they're so thin, they're practically not there. And so I think that's a constant battle, and particularly when you're going into a very long series. I mean, other authors have done it, but for me, I find it difficult to continue with that character and not make them sort of a cliche. And like where Murder, She Wrote, where there were, so many people died in that little town that, and I think that's part of my problem is, I have a little town in most of my books. And so I start to think, yeah, this is getting a little cliche-ish.
The population is getting thin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. Alex, did you have some questions from the audience that we could throw at our authors?
Yes, just this one question that was related to what you were talking about with series. So I thought I'd pop in here so you could add that onto your discussion. So this is from Wendy. Is it up to the publisher to decide if a first book is turned into a series, or do you, as the writer, pitch to the publisher that you are writing a series?
Okay, who wants that one?
Well, I'll hop in and just say that I've always pitched my ideas to my publisher, and I just want to say I really admire people who can write series and keep that fresh. As a reader, I love reading series because it's you hanging out with a friend that you really you know who you're going to be with. It's like having lunch with a friend that you really enjoy their company. So I wish that I could write series because I'm so fond of many of my characters and I'd like to hang out with them more. But the most that I've been able to do is the book that's coming out is going to be a sequel to The Rage Room. That's as close as I've gotten to extending my relationship with my characters. But I think it would be a fabulous thing to be able to hang out with your character and have an ongoing relationship with them. But in terms of the question, usually I just say to my publisher, well, usually I rush off and write a novel, and there it is. And then I say to my publisher, who's Inanna Publications, that is INNANNA, and they're one of the last few standing feminist presses around. So I'm remarkably blessed to be with them. And I'll say, hey, I've had this idea. And they're so supportive of me. I can say I've had this speculative fiction idea, or I've had this, genre mystery idea, and they're very, very supportive of that. So that's where I just present my ideas, and then they go, oh, well, that sounds great. They're very supportive.
So pitching to your publisher is something. Michael, what's your point of view on that? You're an independent, right?
Yeah, well, at my age, I figure I can write. My first book took me 3 years to write. I rewrote it 4 times. I had a good coach and I had a good editor, so that helped a lot. The second book took me 1.5 years. The third book took me 1 year. Now I'm down to 2 a year. So I'm getting better at that. Mind you, the last one I'm writing now, I'm still in editing mode. So you mentioned it is going to be out at the end of May, but it'll probably be end of June. While I'm editing, all of a sudden I heard this strange whirring sound, and that was my self-imposed deadline flying by. So it's not going to be in June.
Yes, go ahead.
I had a similar experience to Lisa and Michael, because I've done both, where I had a traditional publisher and where I've published independently. And when I had with the publisher, they did have more influence on whether I made it into a series or not. And I was, asked if I could continue with a particular series, but I really just felt that I was done. I had left that poor little town alone. So I created another series. However, when my publisher went under, it was a small Canadian publisher, and it's too bad that she had to close her doors, but then I became my own publisher, and now I let myself do whatever I want. If it's a series, great. If it's a standalone, that's good too.
So you decide, and so how do you decide? How do you where are you at in that thinking?
I, I think it's again, as I think Nancy mentioned that, building a world. How much do you like building a world? And I do like building those fictional worlds. They're always comfortable and wonderful and and except for the murders. But so I do like building the worlds, and so that usually makes me decide. I've got two novels on the go right now, which that's Michael, I can sympathize with, taking 2 or 3 years because honestly, I keep flipping from one to the other and it takes me too long. But I did, one of them is definitely going to be a standalone. And the other one is the second one of The Grand Art of Murder because I liked that world and I've still got more to explore in there.
Right. That's phenomenal. And Jay, your thoughts on it?
Well, I've had 3 traditional publishers in the US. One was a fairly major one at the time, one was a small independent, and the other one was somebody with a brilliant idea, but not a whole lot of business sense. And I got really tired of being jerked around and so forth. And I decided I am a person who really likes to be in control. And so I started independently publishing my books. Actually, in 2000, at the time my first mystery was coming out, from a really fabulous little independent publisher in the US who did a marvelous job of getting me reviews, which is a huge thing, from Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, the whole thing. Getting me to BoucherCon and all those places. I was on a panel with Harlan Cohen the first year, and then she realized she didn't have the money to put a paperback out. And our contract went out the window. I was told later that my agent, who hadn't even found the publisher in the first place, had gotten me a lousy contract, whatever. So
Right. Well, I see where you're going. I mean, there's 2 aspects to this, isn't there? There's in that decision-making process, it's a creative decision, but it's also a business decision,
right.
isn't it? And when is one stronger than the other? It's really difficult, I suppose. It depends on a lot of factors. Lisa, what do you think?
Well, I have a home with Inanna, and they really are like a family to me. And so I'm just so I'm with them like I would be with a family. So to leave them would just, I don't know, I feel very, very adrift. And they're very supportive of me in terms of, getting me editors to work with, and in terms of helping me with publicity. And I really I think the fact that I have such a fabulous relationship with them means that I just really wouldn't want to look anywhere else. I definitely, would not be averse to a self-publishing novel. If I didn't have Inanna, I would, however, make sure that I have a fabulous, fabulous editor, because so many times I have thought to myself that my book is so polished and sharp and shiny that the editors weren't going to find anything in it. And then, oh my word, the timeline, the characters, it's just horrible. So that would be my one rule to self, is to really work with, and I mean, there are marvelous, marvelous editors out there. And so I think that would be the only sort of caveat that I'd want to say to people who were, thinking of publishing independently, is just make sure you have a fabulous editor, because oftentimes we think our book is, ready to hit the ground running, and in my instance, it so certainly is not.
So there's more players, obviously, when you're in the business and you do write seriously, you do realize that it takes more people around you. It takes the decisions you make have an impact on your publisher, on the approach, on your audience, on when they see the book. It's complicated, isn't it, sometimes? And I respect the fact that you're expressing that you're in a family, you're in a home. So I wish that for every writer. It would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I'm very, very blessed that way. Yep.
Let's look at some of the questions. Alex, are you listening in? I think there's some questions that perhaps maybe we could explore.
Yes, absolutely. We have a great amount of questions here. So we actually had one that I'd written down from somebody in the chat earlier that kind of went along what you were just talking about, Lisa. So for everybody here, who do you have read your first draft of books before you send them off to the publisher? Is it a friend, a spouse?
Well, I'll just start us all off and say it's my spouse who I think is actually joining this meeting as a guest, and he is a prolific reader. Was one of the reasons we got together was he opened the door to this his study, and it literally books just fell out, right? He reads everything, and he's a marvelous reader, and he reads my first drafts, and he is very, very, very blunt and very astute as to what is working and what isn't working. And I trust him completely. He actually is very factual in terms of where a story's going wrong, or where it lost him, or what he liked about it. I mean, often there's a lot of positives, but he's my very, very first litmus test. And then I have some really good friends who I call on, different people for different genres, because I have the wide range of genres. So I have like a couple of sci-fi speculative fiction reader friends, and I'm always really happy to, read my friends' works as well. So it's not just like a one-way street of me going, hey, here's me with another book. So, and also there's a couple of readers that I have. When I was writing The Rage Room, I have this tech-savvy sci-fi young friend of mine. And so I would ask him about all my time travel stuff. But I'm one of those people who really relies on the kindness of friends and strangers when it comes to the books, because I want to know where have I gone wrong? Do I hold the audience's attention? And so I can be a little bit of a pest that way in asking for feedback. But then, as I say, I always try and reciprocate with the generosity. But to me, that's hugely important, to ask people what they think in the various stages of it, so then I can build it and fix it and make it better.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Alex,
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead, Jay. Or
Sorry.
Catherine. Sorry. Go ahead.
I started teaching when I was 19. So over the years, I collected a whole lot of teacher friends, and they're excellent editors, first editors. They look at it from all sorts of aspects. I mean, talk about your timelines and character development, and but then there's the detail, the color of the eyes, or whether that's wheat or hay, or whether I should have used that word, or and they're excellent also at the spelling and grammar and all those little details as well. So I'm very lucky, and I do have a critique group that has kind of fallen apart during pandemic, but they're great as well, to give general feedback usually. So yeah, I'm very lucky to be able to go to those people first. And then if I, really need some overall editing, I go to my cousin who's just amazing at finding even things that none of those people found before her. So
There's always discoveries in a manuscript, aren't there?
always.
That's wonderful. Alex, perhaps we continue with another question, since you said there were quite a few.
Absolutely. Yes, we actually have quite a few questions here. So this has a little bit of the same sort of idea here. Do all the panelists agree with write what you know? What about a man writing a female point of view, or writing as a reporter if you're not in that profession? And there's a two-parter here. And as far as settings, can you do justice to a setting if you've only visited there once, not lived there? And can you revisit by research?
Well, I'll go to the can a man write from a woman's perspective or a woman's from a man? Absolutely. I have written from the perspective of a 17 or 18-year-old teenage boy and gotten away with it totally. And in my mystery, I write from the perspective of a late 40s man and a 28-year-old Black woman. So yes, write what you want to write. And I've been told that because I've asked people who were those people or were like those people and got, oh, yes, of course, we're writers. We write what we want to write.
But writing's a discovery process after all, isn't it? It's an exploration. It's research is important to me. I'm sure all of you would jump on that too and say yes. It takes a lot of effort, and discovery is a big part of it. So I'm not. I don't believe in that. You know, write what you know only. It's sometimes it feels good to write what you know. It feels a little easier, but it's not necessarily more valid.
Well, you
We
can
have a
also
guest
write what you
who's-
want to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a guest who's chimed in and said, I have a successful author friend in the UK who wrote about a small rural area that I live in now. He's never even crossed the ocean, but he nailed it. And I know because I live here.
Well, that's great.
I mean-
And go ahead. Yes, who's speaking?
I'm sorry.
Lisa?
I just, yeah, that, you know, the whole write what you know. I started off that way. I wrote what I know. And when I first submitted it to a publisher, they told me that the character was banal and that the story went nowhere, and that it was, you know, the protagonist showed no growth. So for me, it's maybe, you know, take a tiny kernel of what you know, but people always think, you know, writers, you know, we as people, I don't think, well, me particularly, not very interesting, but the fictional creations that we come up with are so vastly more interesting than because don't you think we take sort of like, let's say, half a dozen to a dozen people and put them into one person, so it wouldn't really even just be you know, the sort of one thing that, you know, I hope I'm making sense here, because, you know, write what you know is such a small little thing really, but then you know, when it comes out as a novel, there's so much that's gone into that, so many characters and so much backstory. So, and I love what Jay and you guys are saying, like, write what you want to write. I think that's, yes, totally embrace and support that.
Absolutely. Alex, next question.
Where do you get the ideas for your characters and their names?
That's an interesting one. I'm always
Michael,
looking
go
for new names. So, you know, I'll talk to somebody, or a waitress will have an unusual name. I'll take it down. I don't know if she's going to be a good girl or a bad girl, but I'll take the name down. It's unusual. So it's always a challenge, but my mind works in weird and wonderful ways. You know, I can be filling up, unfortunately, a very expensive at the gas pump, and I'll see a van, and then I still look at what happens if somebody comes in, grabs the guy, and runs away. You know, there's some kind of a kidnapping. Why not could be a spy story? You know, as writers, we pass by on the street, and everybody just passes by. We'll see 8 stories.
Yeah.
The little kid with this, and the mother is this, and this. You know, it's always something happening, and you grab onto that. And say, oh, I'll keep that for this story, that story. You know, write what you know is, I think, the basis. But if you don't know it, look it up, get help, and research. So then you know it.
You're kind of saying write what you imagine.
That's yes, right. You've got it.
You know, and Jay, what you were describing made me think of what J.A. was saying earlier on, where she projects, you know, where good places for bodies.
That's right. That's right.
Really interesting. Go ahead, J.A.
Okay, here goes my brain. Okay, I still have brain fog, so I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead.
No problem.
Don't worry. I was just going to say, a really handy place to pick up character names is in a graveyard. Graveyards are really, really marvelous for wandering around and finding great character names. I keep running lists of names, you know, but if I am watching a TV program or something, or even a sporting event or something, and then a name catches my fancy, one of my characters in the Rage Room is Stingray Bob. And actually, there's a race car driver called Stingray, and I thought I have to have a Stingray somewhere because that is the coolest thing. So yeah, I keep a little sort of a notepad going of names that I like, or if you ghost houses or plaques that you see. So because if you're in a situation you're like, oh, I really want to find a name, sometimes it can be tricky. So I have my little reservoir of names that I go back to.
I think it's nice what we end up talking about is a bit staying connected to your environment and letting it drive creativity out of us, and not necessarily have a formula or a way that a constraint from the beginning, right?
I remembered what I was going to say. Two things. One, I tend to go and look for names that were popular the year that character was born, because I find that helpful. But the main thing is I absolutely hate it when you're reading a book and your two characters' names are so close together. So I keep like A, B, C, D down at the bottom of my page and stroke off names as I use those letters, because I have a lot of characters in my books, and just try to make sure that I don't have similar named characters unless they're married to each other or whatever. But just a little minor point.
Good advice. Good advice.
Yeah, that's a great point, because some of my novels, someone I didn't even notice, but one of them, she said to me, "My goodness, you've got a lot of characters whose names start with M's." And I felt so chagrined and I've never made that mistake again. She was like, she thought there was sort of some sort of deeper meaning to it, and actually no, it was just a mistake.
We have a follow-up question to that I love here. I've never seen this one before. Have you created a character that you never want to see again?
Nice question.
Very.
Oh, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely. I've created a couple of very despicable people who, once they were out of my head, I would just goodbye, slam the door on the way out. But it would, and sometimes people have said to me, where on earth did that come from? Because you seem like a kind of normal, nice person. And I'm like, I don't know. There's something dark in there.
We have to divide the characters are not us, right?
Right.
And even though we explore the reality of the world, there are things in the world that aren't really beautiful and wonderful that are all going on. We don't just write things that make us feel good either. We write things because it's in the world around us.
Exactly. Yeah, especially when you're dealing with some issues that I want to explore and want to write about, and but that involves getting involved with some pretty awful characters. Yeah.
I thought I'd throw in a question that's my question, and I find the answer interesting from writers. It's a very short answer, but it takes a lot of thinking sometimes. It's, what famous novel do you wish you had written? Anyone?
I wish I'd written I wish I'd Car by Harry Crews. It's this guy who actually eats a car, and it's maybe not first and foremost in everyone's minds, but it's so convincing. Like he literally eats a car. So
I always wish I had written 50 Shades of Grey, because it's like the worst written book in the world and sold like billions of dollars worth of.
So, is that the goal for you, Catherine?
Yeah.
Jay, you yourself?
One of Georgia O'Hare's books is probably my favorite mystery ever. It's called Behold, Here's Poison. So I'd love to have written it. I'm striving to try to write something like it.
And did we go around? Michael?
I wish I had written the 60 novels that Robert B. Parker wrote.
Oh, okay. All right. And Alex, are you a writer? Do you have an answer?
I'm a reader. I'll take any of your books.
Which would you have wished you'd written?
Oh gosh. Any
Not
of
a small
yours,
thing.
all of yours, all of yours. I don't, you know what? My answer would be that I am not somebody who could put together that many words. I am just an idol of anybody who can put together 300 pages of amazing words that keep me gripping on. I read all the time, and I'm amazed by all of you wonderful creative people. Thank you. Don't stop, because I'm going through books and I need more material.
I think you'll get more books and manuscripts going your way. I think people need to focus on it. My answer to my own question is Slaughterhouse Five. It's the
Yeah.
book that really has a lot of meaning to me, and I rediscover it all the time. I've read it, I don't know how many times, and every once in a while I trip up on it. I was moving some books this morning, and I found it again on my one copy of it, and I started flipping through it, and so it goes. Anyway, that's a quote from it.
Nice.
So listen, we're having fun here. It's really interesting. We have about 10 minutes left, and maybe we just have a glance at the incoming questions, because there's quite a few.
Absolutely. We've got one here. So we touched on getting some ideas and inspiration from gas stations, some names from cemeteries. Our guest here says, how do you go about researching for your novels? Where do you think the best place is to find information?
Depends on the topic, I think, personally, for me. If it's something that I can look up on the internet and, you know, it's as true as what whoever wrote that piece is telling me. And if it doesn't really matter, you know, that it's absolutely 100% true, that's a good source. If I want, a library is still a really good place to go and look up things. Especially, you know, we still use microfiche and so on and so forth. But and I do like to go places if I can. You know, when I go down to the river and I, you know, look at homes that are at the sides of the river, or I, you know, just something simple like that I can do. So I think it depends on, you know, there's so many different sources, and you know, interviewing a police officer. I have a police officer next door, a retired one, so I interview him a lot. That sort of thing. It depends on what it is.
Right. Lisa, yourself?
Completely agree with Kathy. And I love going to sort of secondhand bookstores and you know, looking at, there's so many amazing little books, you know, that I find are marvelous sources of reference that you won't find that stuff on the internet. I try and dig around for stuff that other people won't find. And so you know, and it's really wonderful. Old magazines, you know, things like that, or even sort of album covers to get the idea of what people might be wearing, you know, or art posters, things like that. So I try and look in ways, in things that are not obvious, because the internet is very handy, but I find it mostly handy for you know, did it rain on a certain day and what time did the sun rise, if I'm trying to sort of work out a timeline or something. But I try not to rely on it too much for general information, because that's the stuff that anybody can get their hands on. So yeah, I'd say probably a secret weapon are those little bookstores where they smell so musty and great, and you can go in and find something that no one else would have come across. So
Lisa, you're a treasure trove of ideas. It's phenomenal to talk with you. Research. I gotta go. That's great. Michael, well, your 2 cents.
Yeah, I've done things the hard way. I've got a lot of books on police procedures. I've interviewed policemen also, and I've also been spent part of a week at the Wisconsin Police Academy. So they have courses once a year for authors. It's called Authors Police Academy. So it's very valuable. There's so many courses that you wonder, which one am I going to take? You know, clearing a room, CSI type fingerprinting. So I wish I could go every year, but it's a little bit in the expensive side and time consuming. So, but I've done that. Research normally is done on the net. I go to Wikipedia if I want to check a fact or something. And and all the books I have, forensics for dummies, I have, you name it, I've got it. The bullet goes in here, is it going to kill him? What's the So I remember being in the hospital for some weird event, and I was asking the nurses, I mean, if you find just the jawbone, is it a male or a female? How they go, no, we don't know. They said, well, the size, if it's bigger, it's a male. I said, no, it could be a big Swedish woman. It's in great shape. Who knows? But men have a little notch in the back here that women don't have. None of the nurses knew that. So research, research, and research.
Research, research, research. Alex, next question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jay. I didn't see you.
I was just going to say everything he said. I've been there, done that. Writers Police Academy. I'm a member of Sisters in Crime. I'm a member of Crime Writers of Canada, the whole thing. But every book I find is different because in my case, my situation, my characters are totally different. But wanted to mention this one, The Case of the Homeless Pup. I wrote a little novella, and it was because I followed the Toronto and York Region Police, and they were constantly talking about, missing person, and like there'd be 10 or more missing people every day, and you never find out if they were found. And I know at least one person whose brother-in-law disappeared from the GTA some years ago and has never been found. And I wanted to write something which would be totally different from my other books, because in this case, the body would be found first. But sometimes it's as simple as, okay, so I had a pup lead somebody to a skull, and that led to them finding the skeleton. But I had to research online and whatever, how would somebody go about catching a pup that doesn't want to be caught? And fortunately for me, after I'd done my research, I went and talked to my veterinarian son and got everything figured out. But like sometimes it's just using your brain to think about what if, how do I do, who do I know, and stuff like that. And just, until you're satisfied that you know what you need to know for each situation.
So more research, interesting research is important. Listen, we only have a couple minutes, 3 or 4 minutes left, and we should wrap up. But is there any last statements? If we do a little round table, I'll start in the order that you appeared to me. Lisa, just a minute or so, just to wrap up.
I just want to say, I think to J.A.'s point, there are so many unsolved mysteries in the real world, and that's what we try and do, is make sense of unsolved mysteries, don't we? And that's the thing, we try and bring resolution to people where it's like, what happened? And I think that's such an important part of writing, is our imaginations and our research tries to solve mysteries of things that we may never know the real answers to.
Catherine?
Yeah, that's great, Lisa. I agree. That's why I love mystery, is, you get to solve the problems of the world. And at the end, there is some kind of closure, and there's control over a very uncontrollable world, really. So that's why I absolutely love mystery. And even though I sort of drift sometimes in my short stories into other territory, I always come back to the mystery. And I think it's because, we get to solve those problems.
J.A.?
Yeah, to me, we're all normal people, and I want to write books about normal people, not necessarily psychopaths or whatever, but I find it fascinating. And the reason I write the way I do is because I see the people before the murder, and then you can see them after and how it affects them and how they react to it. And I was a double major with psychology and English, so I'm always bringing the psychology in there. So that's what I enjoy the most.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. Michael, last words?
The last words, well, talking about mystery, and mystery, I'm privileged to be part of the dedicated group that worked to bring this mystery webinar to fruition. I want to give a shout out to our team leader, Mike Martin, author of the Sergeant Windflower series. Without his creative leadership, and this fun series would not have been possible. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks.
All right,
So-
everyone. Well, we are wrapping up this wonderful panel. I want to thank Denis for being our moderator and all of our panelists who've taken the time to come and present to you today. And I also want to thank our audience for putting in those questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We really appreciate your participation.